Let me tell you what really flipped the switch for me. I was walking to my car after dinner over in Old Fourth Ward. Nothing special, just a Tuesday. I glanced across the street at what used to be an old industrial building, except now it had string lights, people sitting outside with wine, and a DJ booth tucked into a loading dock. I had to double check the address because that was not there just 2 weeks ago. And that's when it hit me. This city doesn't wait for press releases. Atlanta shifts in real time, and you either notice it early or you miss it entirely. All right, let me hype you for a second. Atlanta is not up and coming. Baby, that ship has sailed. What's happening now is sneakier. This city sifts in pockets, not headlines. One block feels normal, and the next feels like you accidentally stepped right into the future. You grab a coffee in Old Fourth Ward, step back outside, and magic spills out of a warehouse. Scooters fly past you, and you think, wait, when did this become the vibe? That moment isn't random. It is a split second at a red light when you realize the building on the corner didn't exist. Now it's packed on a Tuesday. That's Atlanta in its natural state, mid-stride, mid-shift, already ahead of conversation. And real talk, Atlanta has always been misunderstood. People think that they've got it figured out because they drove through once. They got stuck on 75 with sirens and bass rattling the car right next to them, and they call that research. But if you actually live here, living here teaches you fast. The signal, it's not noise, it is timing. The shifts you notice before they turn into headlines. So if you're already here, or thinking about moving here, or trying to understand why Atlanta suddenly feels different, stay with me. Because once you spot the pattern, the whole city rearranges itself in your head. And you'll understand why so many people are trying to get in early. Keep that feeling in mind because now we need to talk about what it's actually driving it. And you'll see why two specific neighborhoods that almost nobody is talking about are quietly becoming some of the smartest bets in the city. More on that coming up. A few years ago, I started noticing something that wasn't showing up in the headline. My usual drives, they just felt different. Streets I used to pass without thinking suddenly had people on them. Warehouses that were dead early in the evening were suddenly lit up on a random weeknight. And the questions changed. It stopped being, is this area okay? And it turned into, why does this feel fun now? That's when it clicked. Atlanta was not reinventing itself overnight. It was quietly rearranging the city while people weren't looking, testing the energy first, letting places warm up before committing to the build out. And once you recognize that pattern, you will start seeing the city differently. You can tell the difference between hype and momentum, between places that look finished and places that already feel alive. And here's a quick personal story. I had a client from LA who flew in to look at neighborhoods, not home, just the feel of things, an exploration trip. I took her to Pullman Yards with no real agenda. She was expecting to walk a dusty construction site. Instead, we walked into an impromptu art installation, a cocktail pop-up, and a photo shoot all happening at the same time. She didn't ask about square footage. She asked, how do I buy into this kind of energy? That's when I knew. This was bigger than real estate. It was culture first momentum. And that's exactly where we need to start. Because the biggest shift in Atlanta right now isn't about what's done. It's about what's already activated. This is where a lot of people get Atlanta wrong. They think a place has to be finished to matter. Buildings topped out, units delivered, and the ribbon cut. Atlanta doesn't wait for that. Atlanta tests the lifestyle first. I saw this up close walking a client through Pullman Yards for the very first time. Not a showing, just a let's go see kind of afternoon. They expected construction dust and future potential. What they didn't expect was people. Music echoing through the historic brick buildings, lights on, lines forming, film crews packing up after a shoot. They weren't asking about timelines or unit counts. They said, why does this already feel like somewhere that people hang out? That moment is pure Atlanta. Pullman Yards sits on roughly 27 acres in Kirkwood, operating under SPI 15 zoning with city-approved entitlements for a long-term phased mixed-use build-out. According to approved filings, residential components are intentionally scheduled after early activation uses, not alongside them. That sequencing is not accidental. Developers led with adaptive reuse, converting former railcar manufacturing buildings into event venues, creative offices, and production spaces. Research and planning consensus consistently show that this approach reduces capital risk, generates early cash flow, and builds cultural momentum before density ever arrives. Short version, culture first, rooftop second. You see the same logic playing out downtown at underground Atlanta. For years, people treated it like a failed mall. But the reset wasn't about reopening every storefront at once. It was actually about reintroducing activity first. Event, nightlife, select retail. Residential plan phases above and around it. The goal wasn't polished, it was present. And this connects directly to Atlanta's booming film and creative infrastructure. Studios like Shadowbox and Electric Out aren't just about content. They're neighborhood engines. They bring energy to areas that used to be dark after 6 p.m. And if you're wondering where the next two major lifestyle shifts are bubbling up, hang tight. We'll hit that just next. Okay, so Underground's revival follows the same activation. First, playbook. Get people back into the space before the full build-out is complete. Then let demand catch up. And this all connects directly to Atlanta's film and creative infrastructure boom. Studios like Shadowbox and Electric Out are expanding the city's production footprint. And that matters more than most people realize. Film crews don't just show up to shoot. They occupy space. They activate neighborhoods. They bring weeknight energy to places that would otherwise be quiet. That's why seeing production activity at Pullman Yards or downtown is not just background noise. It is part of the lifestyle engine. Creative infrastructure acts as an early indicator of where people will spend time long before housing supply fully land. Once you see this move, you spot it everywhere. Atlanta doesn't wait for everything to be finished. It lets places warm up socially before they explode physically. You feel that when a site that technically isn't done already feels busier than something brand new across town. And this is where strategy matters. A finished building looks good on paper. An activated place makes people show up and stay. The difference shapes demand long before pricing ever catches up. Okay, so quick pause before you move on. If you're thinking about moving to Atlanta or making a smart play here, reach out to us. We are the local Atlanta real estate team of choice, and we help people understand where momentum is actually building. Our contact information is linked below. Midtown works because nothing here lives in isolation. This is not a single building story. It is a layering story. Jobs, housing, culture, transit, nightlife, green space, all stacked tightly enough that life here actually overlaps. Midtown Union is the cleanest proof of just that. On roughly 8.5 acres, it combines a 26-story, 612,000 square foot class AA office tower, a 26-floor residential building with about 355 units, a boutique Kimpton hotel with roughly 205 to 230 keys, and tens of thousands of square feet of street-level retail. That mix, it's intentional. Research in urban design consistently shows mixed-use districts work best when people can move between work, home, and leisure, all without resetting their day. Midtown Union does that in one footprint. And trust me, you can feel it. Your mornings there start with foot traffic instead of garage doors. Lunch, one of my favorite parts of the day, spills over onto the sidewalks. Evenings don't shut the area down, they layer it. Office workers heading out as residents are heading in. And hotel guests, they get to blend in with locals. That constant overlap is what turns a district into a neighborhood. Now, imagine zoom out in just a few blocks and you can see why Midtown doesn't stall. Spring Quarter plays a different but equally important role. This is where Midtown's employment gravity keeps getting reinforced. Tech-forward offices, innovation-driven tenants, and large-scale commercial space quietly pulling a younger workforce into an area every day. Spring Quarter doesn't need to be flashy. Its job is its consistency. It keeps daytime population density high, which feeds restaurants, retail, and housing demand across Midtown. And not just within its boundaries. That is the ecosystem working. Midtown Union layers lifestyle. Spring Quarter anchors employment. Cultural institutions and MARTA stations reduce friction. Green space and nightlife keep people around longer than planned. None of these pieces matter as much on their own, but together, they are precisely why Midtown behaves differently than any other dense area here in Metro Atlanta. All right, personal story time again. I had a couple relocating from San Diego, tech and healthcare. They wanted walkability, culture, but didn't want too loud or too crowded. I told them to stay in Midtown just for one weekend. No schedules, no tours. They called me Sunday and said, we walked to brunch, stumbled into a jazz show, took Marta to the High Museum, and they never used their rental car. So they ended up buying a condo that very next week. That is the power of layering, right? The city actually works here. This is also where assumptions fall apart. Some people still think that Midtown is just traffic and office towers. But if you stand on Spring Street near Art Center Way and watch how people actually move, walk to Marta, cut on over to Woodruff Art Center, grab dinner without touching your car. That kind of daily convenience doesn't scream for attention, but it is incredibly sticky, right? You can feel the difference here. You'll feel the difference between daytime function and the nighttime pull, and both actually work. Quick check. When you picture your ideal Atlanta lifestyle, is it walkable and layered or more space and separation? Drop it in the comments. Midtown tends to polarize people, and it says a lot about how you live. From a real estate perspective, this is why Midtown holds attention across cycles. Demand here is not tied to one use case. When office slows, residential carries weight. When residential cools, employment density and hotels keep activity moving. That diversification creates resilience that you can actually feel on the street. Midtown shows what happens when everything lines up in one place. But the next shift Atlanta is making isn't about stacking uses tighter. It's actually about reconnecting parts of the city that were never meant to be cut apart. Midtown shows you what Atlanta looks like when everything is stacked together and working together. Now, we're going to talk about what happens when the city tries to fix the part that were never supposed to work in the first place. Because the truth is, a lot of Atlanta's layout is not natural. It was engineered. And one of the biggest examples is the downtown connector, I-75-85. That highway didn't just move cars. It split neighborhoods. It made Midtown and downtown feel like two different planets. You can feel it in your body when you're near it. The noise, the speed, the way the street grid just gets interrupted like someone ripped a page out of the city. That's why the stitch matters. It's not a cute park project. It is a repair job. The big idea is simple. Cap a portion of the connector and reconnect downtown and Midtown with a public space and better street. The full vision is about 3/4 of a mile and roughly 17 acres of green space. But what's real in action right now is phase 1, a cap that's about 450 feet. That's the pilot, the proof, the part that has to work before anything else gets traction. And here's the part people don't love hearing, but it's the real story. The stitch is not limited by engineering. It's limited by money and coordination. The full build out has been estimated around $713 million. Funding has been moving, but it's been volatile. Local tools like tax assessment districts have helped secure chunks of money. And there's been headline funding like the $50 million boost that kept momentum alive. At the same time, major federal funding that was expected for the project was rescinded, roughly $151 million, which is not pocket change. That is the difference between clean timeline and phase this thing like your life depends on it. That's why you'll hear construction windows like 2026 to 2030 for phase 1, with the reality that big infrastructure projects often slide when the capital stack is still getting built. Quick reset, because this is where people usually miss what actually matters. But here's the upside. Phasing is not failure. Phasing is survival. Projects like this don't get built because someone posts a pretty rendering. They get built because the first phase proves the value, proves public support, and makes the next round of funding easier to justify. The stitch is basically Atlanta saying, let's fix a historic mistake, but let's do it in a way that doesn't collapse under its own ambition. Now, layer that reconnection story with something like Centennial Yard. The Gulch has been sitting there like this weird blank spot in the middle of everything. Centennial Yards is the kind of redevelopment that can change how downtown feels, not just what it looks like. It is massive, built to turn dead zones into real neighborhoods with housing, offices, and street life. And when you pair a project like Centennial Yards with a reconnection project like The Stitch, you're not just building cool stuff, you are changing flow. You're changing where people actually spend time. You're changing what feels walkable, what feels connected, what feels worth it. And then there is 1105 West Peachtree as an exclamation point. That is Midtown continuing to rise vertically, signaling that demand for true urban living is not theoretical here. It is being built right into the skyline. That tower is the kind of project that doesn't happen unless the city believes the center of gravity is staying put. So when you look at these together, the story is bigger than any single project. Midtown is stacking, downtown is reloading, the connector is being challenged, not just endured. And Atlanta is doing it the hard way, which is the only way these things actually last. Now, if all of this sounds big and citywide, it is. But the next shift is even more personal because nothing changes a city faster than giving people somewhere to breathe, somewhere to walk, somewhere to be outside that doesn't feel like a parking lot with trees. Atlanta's West Side forces a different conversation. Green space over here isn't aesthetic. It isn't a lifestyle bonus. It is doing real, measurable work. Westside Park, Bellwood Quarry, officially Shirley Clark Franklin Park, proves the point. This is the largest park in the city, but size isn't the headline. The function is. Beneath the trails and overlook sits a 2.4 billion gallon emergency water reservoir. Recreation above, water security below. That combination puts this park in a different category entirely. It's not decoration. It is infrastructure. You feel the shift immediately. The air opens up, highway noise fades, bikes hum past, kids echo across the lawns. Wind cuts across the quarry overlook. Quite a view. The scale is unmistakable. This doesn't behave like a neighborhood park. It operates at a regional level. Planning research consistently shows that parks of this size influence public health, climate resilience, and long-term investment patterns in ways that smaller green spaces simply cannot. Westside Park was built to last decades and not win a ribbon cutting. Parks at this scale do not sit quietly. They pull gravity toward them. That's why Echo Street West matters. This mixed-use project rises near the park with residential units, walkable retail, and everyday amenities that didn't exist here before. Echo Street West is not competing with the park. It is responding to it. Public investment went first. Private development followed. And trust me, that order matters. The data backs this up. Large urban parks reliably increase access, improve health outcomes, and shift land use economics all around them. Property values respond. Development risk changes. Echo Street West exists because the park rewrote the neighborhood's math. What once felt peripheral now supports daily life. Phasing plays a huge role here. Westside Park opened Phase 1 in 2021 with additional access points, trails, and Beltline connections still unfolding. That pace frustrates people who want everything finished at once. But megaparks don't survive that way. Every major case study shows the same pattern. These projects evolve over decades. The surrounding neighborhoods do too. That slower cadence gives communities time to absorb change instead of being steamrolled by it. Once the Westside Beltline connections are fully stitched in, this stops functioning as a destination you plan around and starts operating as part of an everyday routine. Evening walks, weekend rides, casual meetups that do not require logistics. That is the moment that green space crosses the line from amenity into infrastructure. Growth always brings tension. Pretending otherwise doesn't protect anyone. The park isn't the risk. Poor follow-through is. What separates the West Side from past cycles is intent. The reservoir makes the site strategically essential to Atlanta's future. Climate resilience is built in. Recreation is layered on top. Projects like Echo Street West show how that kind of investment reshapes daily living, not just skylines. Once you see green space functioning at this level, it changes how you evaluate the rest of the city. Because the next phase of Atlanta's growth won't announce itself with massive parks or mega projects. It shows up quietly, block by block, in neighborhoods most people are not watching yet. Value in Atlanta rarely announces itself fireworks. It shows up early in the boring stuff that people scroll past. Transit alignments, street connections, access that saves 10 minutes every day. Infrastructure is a silent partner in every hot neighborhood story. and it usually moves first. Take MARTA, which people love to complain about until they realize how much weight it carries. Areas within walking distance of stations consistently behave differently in downturns and rebounds. That's not hype, that's pattern. Neighborhoods tied into art centers, North Avenue, West End, or Edgewood Candler Park stations don't rely on one type of buyer or renter. They pull students, professionals, creatives, and long-term residents all at once. That diversity stabilizes demand even when the market gets a little choppy. Now layer in the Atlanta Beltline, which at this point is more than a trail. As of recent reporting, roughly 85% of the 22-mile loop is either complete or actively under construction. That matters because proximity to finished segments behaves differently than proximity to future ones. Areas near the East Side Trail already saw the value shift years ago. What's changing now is attention moving towards places like the West End Trail and Southside Connections, where access is improving, but pricing hasn't fully caught up yet. And this is where the conversation gets more nuanced. The future Beltline rail isn't funded or scheduled the same way the trail is, but it still matters, not as a promise, as a signal. Long-range transit plans influence how land gets assembled, how zoning conversations unfold, and where institutional money is willing to wait. Research on transit planning is clear about this. Even unbuilt rail corridors shape expectations years in advance. Smart buyers separates what's guaranteed from what's directional, but they don't ignore either. You feel the difference in daily routines. Fewer car starts, more bikes rolling past in the evening, people choosing routes based on shade and sidewalks instead of traffic apps. Infrastructure rewrites behavior long before it shows up in the comps. Here's a quick gut check. Think about the part of Atlanta you believe is undervalued right now. Is it disconnected, or is it one project away from being plugged in? Drop the neighborhood name in the comments. I want to see where people's instincts are landing. Some parts of a city are built for speed and others are built for endurance. Atlanta's most misunderstood areas tend to fall into the second category because they don't reward impatience or trend chasing. These are places shaped by access, logistics, and repetition. Areas that get better slowly because their value isn't driven by nightlife cycles or aesthetic hype. It's driven by function. By people moving through the system every single day, whether anyone's talking about it or not. That's the lens you need for South Downtown. This area has always had the bones. Tight historic blocks, real storefront scale, immediate proximity to Five Points, Underground Atlanta, Georgia State, and multiple MARTA lines, all converging in one place. The issue was never location, it was sequencing. Investment used to arrive before activity, then disappear when the energy didn't follow. What's different now is the order. Public safety, selective activation, and phased redevelopment are happening before residential density floods in. That approach mirrors what planners and urban economists consistently argue. Downtown districts stabilize when activity and access come first, not just units. You can feel the shift on foot, more movement between Five Point Station and Broad Street. Events pulling people back underground instead of treating it like a forgotten artifact. Residential plans layered above retail instead of replacing it. South Downtown isn't chasing a reinvention headline. It is rebuilding trust at street level. Zoom out, and that long game thinking stretches south along the airport corridor. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport moves well over 100 million passengers a year, which quietly dictates how it behaves for miles around it. This isn't just a travel hub. It is an employment engine, a logistics anchor, and a global connector that most cities never get to leverage at this scale. That's where style redevelopment shows up. Research on airport-adjacent growth is consistent. When transit, hotels, office, and mixed-use redevelopment cluster near a major airport, the value proposition shifts away from lifestyle and toward efficiency and access. Along MARTA's red and gold lines, especially near College Park and Airport Station, that pattern plays out in real time. Hotels, logistics, mixed-use projects, they stack slowly, methodically, and with very little noise. What makes Atlanta different is integration. This corridor is not isolated. It is tied into downtown and midtown by rail. That connection changes who buys, who rents, and who invests. It also explains why value here moves in long arcs instead of spikes. The rewards are people who understand timelines, not headlines. A lot of people still assume proximity to the airport automatically means compromise, noise, chaos, trade-offs. But modern zoning, sound mitigation, and land use planning have shifted that equation. The decision now isn't quality of life versus access. It's deciding which kind of access matters more to you. South Downtown and the airport corridor aren't competing with Midtown or the Beltline. And they don't need to. Their strength is durability, employment density, global relevance. Those places don't win fast. All 16 of these projects sound impressive on paper. Big names, big budgets, big timelines. But none of that matters if it doesn't change real life. Morning routines, commutes, where people actually end up on a random Wednesday night. That's where this shift becomes personal. For relocation buyers, these developments quietly redefine lifestyle alignment. Entry points show up earlier around phased, mixed-use, and infrastructure-led areas. Smaller units, adaptive reuse, early cycle apartments near places like South Downtown, West Midtown, or along emerging Beltline connections. Research consistently shows that buyers living within walking distance of transit, parks, and mixed-use districts stay longer and move less often than buyers in car-dependent areas, which is why access-driven neighborhoods tend to age better over time. It's not about chasing the cheapest option. It's about landing somewhere that still works when the city keeps changing. For move-up buyers and families, the math shifts again. Stability starts to matter way more than trendiness. Areas tied into MARTA, anchored by large-scale green space like Westside Park or close to employment hubs, tend to hold lifestyle value longer than flashier pockets. You see it in how long people stay. You feel it in daily rhythm, shorter drives, backup options when traffic hits, places that function on weekdays and not just weekends. For local sellers, development doesn't lift value evenly. It creates waves. Homes near completed infrastructure behave differently than homes sitting beside projects that are still being phased. Sellers who understand whether they're early, mid-cycle, or already riding the curve make very different decisions. That awareness often matters more than timing the market perfectly. And even for people who aren't moving at all, these projects still reshape daily life. New grocery options where there weren't any. Streets that finally connect. Parks that become part of routine instead of something you plan a whole day around. You hear it in the city. Fewer car starts in the morning, more people on foot in the evening. That doesn't come from vibes. It comes from planning decisions that took years to land. Here's the part that most people miss. Not every development is meant for every person. Some reward speed, others reward patience. The advantage comes from knowing which game you're playing before you make a move. That's why these 16 projects matter. Not because they're flashy, because together they quietly redraw how Atlanta actually works for the people living in it. And once you see that clearly, the final question isn't what Atlanta is becoming. Last story before we wrap, okay? A client of mine owned a duplex near West Side Trail. They bought it before the trail opened. Everybody told them it was a gamble. 2 years later, the trail is in, the park opened, and developers are calling them. That's not luck. That's recognizing early infrastructure before it turns into a brochure. Atlanta doesn't reward people who chase headlines. It rewards people who understand timing. What you just saw was not a list of shiny projects. It was a map of lifestyle-first development. Infrastructure that quietly drives value. Downtown areas rebuilding trust. Long game corridors most people honestly overlook. 16 moves that explain how Atlanta actually grows. We see this play out constantly. We've helped relocation clients who skipped the obvious neighborhoods, landed near early infrastructure, and ended up with daily routines that actually got easier over time. We've also worked with local sellers who thought they were early, only to realize they were sitting on underappreciated positioning once buyers caught up. That's not luck. That is understanding the layer. We're the local Atlanta real estate team of choice. If you're thinking about relocating, buying, or selling, and you want real grounded guidance, call us, text us, email us, or even DM us. No pressure. Our info is right there in the description whenever you're ready. And don't stop there. Go watch our playlist, Living in Atlanta Before You Move, the real version. The next video breaks down the neighborhoods people rush into versus the ones that quietly hold up over time. I appreciate you guys, as always, for spending time with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.